Do you want me to flip it up and down, or?
Yeah, if you could.
Okay, I actually need an extra hand, but I'll try to do this. The straight curved edge is this edge right here, and it coincides with the curvature of the heel. And the curved straight edge, or I say straight edge, it's a curved edge, but it's very man-made like, not rough, but very consistent, corresponds with that respective portion of the heel, or in the case of the toe as well. This particular edge here may be a curved contusion from the heel. It corresponds with this respective area of the heel of the shoe.
Madam Court Reporter, Quarter Till.
I'm almost finished, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bodziak, based upon your analysis of all of the items that we've discussed today, was there any indication that more than one pair of shoes was involved in this crime?
No, there was not.
And based upon your comparison of the Bruno Magli shoe with the defendant's Reeboks, can you include him as a candidate who could have worn the shoes that created the impressions in this case?
Yes, I could include him as a candidate for possibly having worn those shoes.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right. Counsel, I thought we agreed to take a brief recess at this point. All right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a recess to reset up some of the exhibits and a few matters, so we'll be in recess probably about 15 or 20 minutes. All right, please remember all my admonitions to you, and Mr. Bodziak, you can step down. Matter, Mr. Bailey, your client has had the opportunity to review those items. All right, we're ready to proceed. All right, Deputy McNair, let's have the jurors, please. The record reflect we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Bodziak, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, good afternoon, Mr. Bodziak. You're reminded, sir, you are still under oath. Mr. Bailey, you may cross-examine.
Mr.
Bodziak, in your book, you indicate that in many law enforcement departments, footprint impression identification is often a poor orphan, either in the document examiner's corner, or fingerprint guy's corner, and so forth.
I don't think I used the term poor orphan, but I think I understand what you mean. It takes second or third place to another discipline, yes.
All right. Have you worked directly with your counterpart at the LAPD in cases including this one?
Yes, I have in the past.
Okay. And what about in this case?
Worked in what capacity?
Well, in an advisory capacity, how early in the game were you consulted in this matter? Can you tell me?
I first received the evidence, I believe, August 8th of 1994. I was advised that I would be receiving it a few days prior to that.
So you had no input at all in the handling of the crime scene, et cetera?
That's correct.
Now, would you tell the jury the difference between a patent and a latent foot impression?
Yes, a patent, P-A-T-E-N-T, foot impression is one which is visible to the naked eye, and a latent, L-A-T-E-N-T, foot impression is one which is invisible, cannot be seen by the naked eye.
Is it possible for an expert to expose, as you showed us with the infrared on the dress, a latent footprint so that it becomes visible and photographable?
That's often possible, yes.
And what about footprints that are made with the substance leaving the impression on concrete, as in this case being blood? Are there ways to enhance the blood chemically with lighting, special photography, in order to lift those prints as you might lift a latent fingerprint?
Primarily in this case, either through specialized photography or through chemical enhancement.
All right. Had you been called to the scene of the crime and seen what you have before you now?
Yes.
And this, by the way, is a reconstruction done last February, correct?
When I visited the scene,
That
yes.
exhibit that's standing
Yes.
vertically.
Yes.
Might you not have been able to enhance some of the footprints which you could not identify through the use of special techniques?
That would be possible.
Okay. Had you been called upon to do so, do you have the equipment and experience to have looked in the home of the victim, Nicole Brown Simpson, for any evidence of footprints going in and out or on the carpet and other places?
Bloody
Overruled.
footprints or any footprints?
Any footprints?
Would I have the ability to look in the home? Of course.
All right. And tell the jury, if you would, how these can be seen, even though they may not be apparent to the naked eye.
You're referring only to the latent footprints then?
Latent footprints.
Okay. Latent footprints, we're covering a large number of possibilities here, so let me list a few, and if you want.
Right.
If you have a latent footprint, it denotes one that's not visible, and very often it's not visible because the contrast of the material that's deposited by the shoe it's essentially the same color as the background it's on. For example, if a person has some residue or dust on their shoe and steps onto a light-colored tile floor, both the impression and the floor being so close in color and the impression being so thin, it simply wouldn't be able to be seen. But with either specialized lighting or with special lifting techniques, that impression could be further visualized. It could be either discovered or transferred to a black surface, which would then give better contrast. So with regard to possible impressions, you could go through an interior scene and using techniques such as that, look in areas for footwear impressions.
Were you at any time furnished any footwear impressions of the interior of the Nicole Brown Simpson home to examine or compare?
No.
Now, in the sketch, we have pointed out, let me put this up if I may. With your permission, I'm going to leave it here because the jury's already seen it. It doesn't block us off, place it there.
Certainly.
The question refers to this area here. You told us this morning that soil varied from place to place in its ability to capture and hold footwear impression.
That's correct.
Did you make any examination of that soil on February 16th when you made your trip to 875 South Bundy?
I was aware of it. I purposely didn't look at it because it was several months afterwards, and there could have potentially been tremendous differences in the characteristics of that soil at the time.
And you say you purposely did not even view it?
Not specifically for thoroughness in terms of looking at every aspect of it. It was an area where there are a lot of plants and vegetation and leaves and mulch and all, but I didn't actually look at every little area. I just generally glanced at it as I was doing my other business there.
Did it generally appear to be soft soil?
I didn't walk on it,
Didn't step on it, poke in it?
no.
Well, did it appear to be cracked and dried?
I really didn't examine it any further than what I've described.
Were you anxious not to see it for some reason?
Well, I didn't have any impressions or any reason to see it, and the only way in which I recall it is because it was right next to where I was working.
To your knowledge, were impressions or photographs ever attempted in the area of the soil where Mr. Goldman's body was found?
I asked if there were any other impressions in this case than what I had examined, including casts or impressions photographed in soil. That's a routine question which I ask in any case because for some reason we very often don't get all of the photographs, or a person may make a cast and not think it turned out well and not send it in when in fact it may be of some value. So as a matter of routine, I asked if there were any others, and I was told there was not.
All right, so far as you know, you have everything.
That's correct.
Now, you said at the close of your testimony that Mr. Simpson was a candidate for having worn the shoes whose impressions you found in the photographs.
That's correct.
Now, what do you know besides the fact that you have some size 12 Reeboks that are apparently his that would make him a candidate?
That would be what I was basing my statement on. I couldn't eliminate him. He certainly, with the size foot that would wear these shoes, could wear the Bruno Magli size 12 European size 46 shoes.
That size foot or any smaller foot within limits, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you're assuming that the perpetrator, whoever that may have been, wearing Bruno Magli shoes, size 46, was wearing his own shoes, aren't you?
Well, you can always get into the hypotheticals of could you have borrowed someone's shoes to commit a crime and
Or steal?
or steal them or whatever. Sure, there's always those possibilities.
What are most bank robberies committed with, by way of vehicles?
By way of vehicle,
The perpetrator's vehicle.
they usually steal a car and then they have a switch point at which they get out of the stolen car a few blocks or a few miles from the scene, and they get into their own car, and
Hopefully
very
that
often,
car can't.
very
because
often
the-
they're seen.
Wait.
Excuse me.
You need to allow him to finish
I
his
thought you
answer.
were through. Their hope is that they can't be tied to the vehicle identified by one or more witnesses, perhaps as being at the scene, right?
And sometimes they can't.
Can we eliminate the Reeboks as having made any of the impressions you've testified to today?
I saw nothing to indicate these Reeboks left any impression that I was shown at this scene.
From the pictures that you have exhibited and explained to the jury in the court,
Right.
is it not possible to say those Reeboks did not make those prints?
Is it not possible to say they did not make it? I'm sorry, there's a double negative. I'm not sure how could you rephrase that?
Can you not say, as you examine the Reeboks, these shoes didn't make any of those prints?
I don't feel they did because there would have had to been darker impressions. If you were being totally hypothetical about it and said, could one of those impressions that were very, very faint somewhere further down the walkway in blood have left the impression, in theory, including unrealistic things like could somebody have carried that person wearing these shoes and then put them down, or could they have walked along the soil and behind it and jumped over the wall and then stepped on the sidewalk? If you include those kind of things, then I couldn't eliminate them. But if that person were to walk through the blood down the Bundy walkway, there would be darker impressions before those light impressions.
You know these came from, Mr. Bodziak?
Do I know where they came from? They were represented to me as shoes that Mr. Simpson said that he wore either the day before the crime or the day of the crime.
And he gave them voluntarily to Detective Lang, did he not?
Your Honor, it's not personal knowledge, cause
Sustained.
But in any event, it was represented to you that those were positively identified by Mr. Simpson as his shoe.
That's correct.
Now, on September 21, 1994, after you had gotten into this case apparently and before you had made a positive identification by going to the factory. Did you write a letter to Detectives Lang and Van Adder requesting something?
Yes, I did.
What did you ask for?
I asked if it were possible to obtain any additional shoes of Mr. Simpson for comparison purposes, for different reasons.
And what was the response that you got?
The response I didn't get from them, but the response I got was that no further search warrants were possible when it was I think it was just too late, or I don't know, you'd have to ask them.
A search warrant is an order from a court allowing law enforcement to go into a private residence whether the owner likes it or not, right?
Well, I'm telling you that I don't have firsthand knowledge of the
Okay.
reason. I'm just speculating, which I shouldn't have done.
Okay. But you were told that warrants were unavailable? Okay. Did you ever make any request of the defense that you be permitted to examine all of the shoes in the house?
I've never known of a case where that was done.
Is it logical?
No,
No.
no.
Well, if the defendant has been voluntarily assisting in giving his blood and giving his hair and other things to the police, do you have any reason to think that he would be otherwise?
Well, cause effectively sustained.
Okay. What happens when officers who perhaps may be unaware of the phenomena of latent prints trample up the scene before the technicians get there?
Latent prints of one type, sir.
Footprints.
I know, but in dust, in blood,
In the general circumstances in this case,
in this case, the only ones I'm familiar with are blood. With regard to blood, at the time they arrived, they could have marched 100 people over them. It wouldn't make any difference.
okay, would not have disturbed it or otherwise changed the pattern because it had dried, right?
That's correct.
Blood dries rather rapidly, does it not?
Very rapidly.
If, assume for a minute, someone were to walk down a narrow path partially covered with leaves and partially concrete, might it be that whoever was doing the walking would leave footwear impressions of some kind?
On the leaves or the concrete?
I'm not talking about bloody feet now. I'm just
Okay.
talking about street shoes.
Okay, well, I don't know how many leaves and how much concrete you're talking about, but with regard to leaves, I've never had a case where I had a footwear impression on leaves. I've never, in walking around, and believe, I've created a lot of cases for training, in walking around trying to make impressions. I've never had a case where I could make an impression on a leaf. As I explained earlier today, in theory, if you had a bloody shoe and you stepped on a leaf, aside from the fact it would have probably stuck to the shoe and eventually just got scraped off, it's conceivable you could have found a leaf or two with some partial impressions on it. It's conceivable, but I've never seen one in over 20 years.
But my question specifies a lack of blood on the suspect's shoe.
Oh, I'm sorry, a lack of
Simply
blood.
a dry leather
Yeah.
sole.
I wouldn't think that you would get any reproduction on the leaf whatsoever. On the concrete, concrete's generally rough and porous, and you wouldn't get a residue impression on concrete because whether it's concrete or the carpeting in this courtroom, as you're walking, you're picking up residue, but you're depositing the same residue onto a surface that has the equivalent. So you wouldn't be able to see a differentiation between what you deposited and what you picked up, and you would not be able to visualize any footwear impressions, whether it's carpet or concrete. So you wouldn't, in those cases, be able to, unless the person was picking up some type of residue and then stepped on an object like perhaps a piece of paper or a folder maybe the victim was holding or something that was around the scene. It was relatively clean. If they then stepped on that relatively clean object, then they could leave a coating of that residue either in a patent or latent impression, and then that could be retrieved.
All right, Mr. Bodziak, would you allow the attorneys to complete asking the question before you start to answer?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
As the court reporter has difficulty writing. Mr. Bailey.
When you walk on a surface, you never really know what evidence you may have left of your footwear until it is checked. True?
Yes, sir.
And certainly that would be true of a layman who does not have your expertise in this area, right?
Yes.
If difficult or faint non-bloody, non-greasy, footwear impressions are left, and then the area is trampled, what is the likelihood that any will remain that are distinguishable?
Overall, I assume it's a hypothetical question.
It is, Your
Presuming that the situation was different than the one I just described, and there could be latent footwear impressions at a scene, it's possible that an unknowing person could walk over those and coincidentally happen to step on the same areas, and they probably wouldn't totally eradicate or eliminate them, but they might cause some damage to them.
All right, I wasn't meaning to ask you to assume a single person, but quite a number of people and quite a
Yes.
number of feet walking back and forth over the exact same area. Doesn't that tend to obliterate whatever might have been there?
It doesn't help it, and it may obliterate it, but each case is different.
Okay, fine. When you began to lay out all of the positive footprints that you've testified here today as to left and right,
Yes.
and see what appears to be movement of someone, both down at the gate, on the steps, and then in a fairly straight line out to the west, as if making good one's escape, did you notice something very odd about the pattern?
About the ones that I have labeled left or right,
Yeah.
there's too many of them.
What do you mean by too many?
Well, the person in those Bruno Magli shoes didn't just walk down the walkway once, they went back somehow and walked down again.
All right. Now, why are your impressions generally going to the west?
Because that's where the blood is, and they're tracking the blood from east to west.
And what about the stop and turn? I want to point specifically to these,
Yes,
these two here, both facing directly into the house.
yes,
Do you notice, by the way, that the left and right are on the wrong side?
yes.
And do you have any explanation as to how those were made?
I wouldn't purport to be able to reconstruct exactly what happened, but it appears likely that the person may have been standing over in that bush area where the tree was to get out of the line of sight, perhaps, and then came out of that area initially in the direction of the doorway and then proceeded back west again.
If the set of prints that leads up to L&M were made by the same shoes as L&M, we have a person who's turned 90 degrees and standing like this, do we not?
Not if they're two different sets of tracks.
Okay, so are you assuming that we have a right but no left and a left but no right standing next to each other and both facing south?
Well, I'm not assuming it, that's what's there, and I can't explain why that is happening.
All right. If a person were exiting the scene with some alacrity, and by the way, you talked about gait and stride, there's nothing that gives us much help on the speed in these prints, is there?
No, sir.
Except that they seem close enough together as to suggest if it's one set, no running, no leaping.
I think even if it's one or two sets, they're relatively close together for a person that's big enough to wear a size 12.
You have identified the Bruno Magli 46/size 12 shoe as the only prints left and right that you are able to single out, correct?
That's correct.
And no other shoe of any manufacturer have you been able to pin to any of these impressions, true?
That's correct.
So if there was more than one person running, it would appear that they were both wearing Bruno Magli 46s. Is that right?
Or one person went back after they have worn the blood off their shoe, they went back to the front gate area, reobtained blood on their shoe through whatever activity or walking through the blood they were doing, and then exited that area again. So it could be the same person. In fact, it's very likely that it's the same person.
In other words, having made good one's escape to the alley, you're assuming that somebody, a perpetrator, then returned, stepped in more blood, and made more prints.
if they encountered the second victim in this case, or they forgot something or had some other reason to go back, yes. Yes.
Okay. Can you show me any two prints that overlap?
No.
In the event that someone had done as you suggest and left the alley and then come back for some reason and stepped in blood, would you not be likely to find at least two prints that overlap one another?
Not in an area that big, not necessarily.
Well, it looks like a walking pattern on that diagram, does it not?
No, it looks like two persons, two separate walkings of one person.
Is the southward-facing set of prints, even though they appear to be reversed, that is to say L and M, and L is a right foot and M is the left foot, right?
Yes.
Is that consistent with someone who is leaving and turns to look back for some reason?
No. I mean, it could be, but I would think,
Would you step up to the board and
Sure.
tell me why that is not consistent with the prints we see? What mitigates against it?
okay, you're referring to L and M,
Yeah.
and you're saying, could that person, I'm not sure your enactment of that.
Assume that I'm running or walking west out of the alley
Okay, this
Okay.
direction.
and then turn in some fashion.
Yes.
90 degrees in order to look back 180 degrees.
Right.
Might that have caused those impressions?
Well, they would be on the opposite side.
Puzzling.
Pardon?
That's puzzling, isn't it?
Argumentative.
Sustained.
No, if he has an explanation, I'd like to hear it. It would appear from those prints that L and M is like this.
It's argumentative. I make a motion to destroy Mr. Bailey's.
Oh. And you want to describe, Mr. Bailey, your stance at this point?
Yes, for the record, Your Honor, I'm standing with my legs crossed, my right foot on the left side and vice versa, which is consistent with what we're looking at there, is it not?
Well, yes, with regard to L and M.
If those two were made by the same person at the same time, his legs are crossed, right?
Describe the same time.
2
Stay
feet.
2 feet on the
attached
ground
to
at
the
the
same
same time.
body.
If they were, yes, you'd have to be standing like you are.
All right. Now, if they weren't, then you're assuming somebody with the same shoes walking twice, having gotten a fresh supply of blood to lay on the...
Not necessarily.
No, I'm sorry.
Would you like me to explain?
Yes, please.
Okay. In this particular area, very possibly because it's out of the line of sight of the front gate area, the person could have stepped back into the soil area to get out of the line of sight. They could have stepped forward and looked. They could have stepped back. They could have stepped forward with the left foot on the opposite side and gone down the sidewalk. So there's a very logical explanation for that. And there's no way to absolutely reconstruct it.
Was there soft soil at the time of the crime in that area?
Was there soft soil? When
Right.
I was there,
Just north of the
yeah.
footpath.
I don't have photographs of the soil at that time, nor would I be able to tell the hardness or softness of the soil from photographs. When I was there in February, it was full of vegetation.
Did you see in L&M?
I don't think he finished his answer.
Have you finished your answer?
Well, I was just going to say that very low vegetation, you would have no problem standing in it or walking back in it.
When you photographed or looked at the photographs of L&M, you didn't take any of these, did you?
No.
When you examined those photographs, did you see any evidence of any soil in them?
In the photograph of the impressions, no.
All right. So when you speculate that the author of L&M may have stepped backward into the soil, that is just that, isn't it? Speculation.
Well, it's speculation as much as I can't say that's absolutely what happened, but I would not necessarily expect there to be soil from stepping back in that area. If the soil was very hard or if it was covered with low-growing vegetation, there may be nothing on the shoe and they would still be depositing blood impressions.
Right. And you have said, and again, you're assuming that someone wants to get out of the line of sight. Line of sight of what?
Of whatever they're trying to avoid. A person coming to the gate, a noise out on the front, a noise in the back, anything.
Did you attempt to do that yourself and see if you removed yourself at all from the line of sight of either end?
Just by standing on the edge of the sidewalk, you're out of the line of the sight of the front. Yes, I did observe that because when I was reconstructing the position of these, I was surprised to see them in this configuration, and I was looking for an explanation of why these would be in this direction, and the one that I have given you is one of the better ones that I've thought of.
Okay. Well, where does it lead us?
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Generally speaking, light travels in straight lines, is it not?
Yes, sir.
All right. Assuming that a person is standing on those footprints, can you see on a straight line to the front gate?
You can with L, but as I had explained to you, this could be simply a stepping out and looking and coming back real quick. So in that case, under that hypothetical, which I hate to get into because they're not factual, the person would want to extend out far enough just to get into the line of sight. So again, we can't say if that's what happened or did happen, but it's certainly logical in my opinion.
Did any,
For the record, Your Honor, when Mr. Bodziak was answering that, he stepped forward with his right foot and he turned to his left as if he were looking in the direction of a line parallel with his shoulders.
Yes. Thank you.
do you see any obstruction between the gate and those footprints?
Which gate, sir?
Front gate first.
Front gate. With L,
Yeah,
you can see the front gate if your head is centered over L, presuming your head is over L.
right.
With M, you're starting to interfere with the corner there, but I believe you can see over that, at least part of it.
Have you got a straight edge up there like a pointer?
Yes.
Would you connect L and the front gate, please?
Parallel to the, okay,
No, I don't mean just that edge. Go right for the middle of the front gate and see if you can draw a straight line from both L and M to it.
I'm not sure what you're asking. Like this?
Can you see a straight line from M to that point without
Oh.
obstruction?
Yes,
N, L.
yes.
The same is true for the rear gate?
Yes, it appears to be.
But your theory is that somebody was trying to hide from someone. Is that right?
That's, as I represented that as a hypothetical that might be one plausible explanation of why L and M were heading out of that soiled area.
Okay, now, there are two at a 45-degree angle, a left and a right.
Yes.
Not very close to one another. However, O is fairly close to M. Could that impression have been made by the right foot while M was being made with the left by a person standing like this, one foot cocked at a 45, the other pointing south?
It could be, or the person could have stepped out on M and then headed westward with O being the first step with the right foot. In other words, they could have stepped out of the soil with M and then at an angle stepped off toward the back gate.
Okay. And what about the next one? S, I believe it is.
Well, there's no way of knowing if S was the next one because you have some indistinct ones in here that may be intermediate steps.
I'm sorry, when I said next one, I meant the next one at a 45-degree angle to the track
Okay?
of the person. That is S, is it not?
Yes.
There is no footprint pointing in a similar direction close enough to it to have been made at the same time. Is that true?
None that I can see.
Okay. Now, what is the approximate scale on that chart, do you know?
It's on the
I believe it's on the second board, wherever that is.
It's shown there.
I don't know how to represent
Oh,
that.
here it is.
Yeah.
Just eyeballing that, Mr. Bodziak. By the way, do you prefer being called Mr. or Agent?
Either.
Okay. Just eyeballing that, does it look like a foot is a little less than an inch?
Yes, sir.
All right. So having that in mind, would you say that O and M could have been made by the same person,
Yes, they could.
standing with 1 foot askew?
Yes.
Go ahead. ahead and resume the stand, if you will. If your theory is correct, and somebody, having committed one murder and created a lot of blood, got partway up the walkway and decided to turn around and head back, do you see the turning point anywhere in your reconstruction?
No, I do not see a point where footprints turn around, but I would not expect that that would eliminate the possibility that they did turn around.
Okay. Well, without any evidence of turnaround, supposing you had two people with the same brand and size of shoe,
In my opinion, that would not occur in this case.
why not?
Because in all of the cases I've worked, I can count on one hand the number of cases where a common shoe like this Reebok that's sold in many, many stores, both in size and design, was shared by two persons simultaneously at the crime scene. It has occurred, but only on a couple of occasions, and only with common shoes. You might, for instance, with regard to certain gangs that wear the same pattern of shoes, find that type of a scenario. With regard to different suspects wearing different size shoes of the same brand, I've only had a couple cases like that. So in most instances, if they did have the same brand shoes, they would be different sizes, and only that has occurred, to my knowledge, a couple times over 20 years. Those were with common shoes. These shoes were very uncommon, and most of the shoe stores around the country only carried at one time one size 12. To conjecture, with what I know about this, that two people independently bought size 12 Bruno Magli shoes at different points or over different months apart from the same store or at different stores, and they were only sold by 40 stores, and just happened to commit this crime together is impossible for me to believe.
You're making an assumption I didn't ask you to make, and that is that the pairs were coincidentally similar.
What pairs?
If there were two pair of shoes, that they were there by coincidence.
Overruled.
It's a coincidence that I don't believe would occur.
Of course not. But it could have been deliberate, couldn't it?
No, I don't believe that
Wait,
either.
Wait.
I'm
Sustain.
sorry.
Rephrase the question.
Can we phrase it?
Yes.
Would it be possible for two people to arrange, knowing that footwear, particularly if you're in the business of crime, can be almost as dangerous as a fingerprint? Would it be possible for two people to arrange to arrive at a crime scene in the same footwear, make and model?
Of this type, Bruno Magli, size 12,
Yeah.
Solga soles,
Yeah.
as I've stated, in my opinion, no.
Do you mean to say that it'd be impossible to buy two pair of those shoes in the United States?
You're suggesting that they intentionally did it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, and the reason I'm saying no is because most people, even fairly knowledgeable people about evidence, would not have the degree of knowledge necessary to know where to find some kind of a rare shoe. I mean, they would go for a common shoe, like, presuming that that could be done with a common shoe, they would do that with a common shoe. They would not be searching for $160 to $180 Bruno Magli shoes where they had to go halfway, to different states at the same time to buy them in the same size. Just, in my opinion, it wouldn't happen. It's uncanny. I don't believe it happened, and I don't believe it happened intentionally or otherwise.
But it's possible.
In my opinion, it's not even possible because it's so ridiculous.
What you're saying is that two perpetrators who decided on this plan are totally incapable in the United States of America of finding two pair of Bruno Magli 12s. Is that right?
Overruled.
What I'm saying is they wouldn't have the knowledge to look for Bruno Magli shoes of this rare design. If they were going to commit a crime, why not just go out and buy shoes down at the store where you could walk in and find two of the same size and design? Why go to a situation where you would have to find rare shoes and probably have to make phone calls at one store to find out where you could buy the next pair at another store and spend that kind of money just to do that? People are not aware of footprint evidence to that degree. That would be more sophisticated than I could even envision if you asked me how would I construct something like this. It's just uncanny.
Do you ever work on bank robbery cases?
Yes,
Have not quite a number of those been solved by discrete footprints, foot impressions?
by footprints on the counters or in the lobby or on the exit of the bank, yes.
If I were to hop the bank's counter to get the money
Right.
with this shoe, and you recovered me with this shoe nearby, might you be able to match exactly my shoe print to the impression on the counter?
Yes, I do, and I do that regularly.
Okay. So why is it that you feel that criminals are unaware of the fact that footwear can be a liability in detection?
Misstates the testimony.
They simply are. I mean, we're having a hard time,
Could I ask you a question, Mr. Dietrich?
Wait, he needs to
Go
finish the
ahead.
answer.
we're having a hard time educating the police forces of all of the possibilities with shoes. Most people are totally unaware of the footprints they leave, and perhaps the best example I could give of this is maybe 15 years ago there was a fad called streaking, and I had a case involving some streaking in a hotel up in the northeast part of the country. And ironically, the only part of clothing that the person ever wore and what convicted the person was the shoes. So I use that as a good example of how persons are just unaware of the prints they leave, which we discussed earlier, and they are even more unaware of the kind of hypothetical that you're suggesting, and not only are they unaware of that evidence and how to use the evidence in the manner you suggested, but the possibility or the likelihood of them going to the extreme that they would have to find this shoe, I don't believe, in my opinion, that that could possibly happen.
So the FBI investigates streaking.
We conduct comparisons of evidence that are submitted to us by any law enforcement agency. We don't decide what's important or not.
Any idea of how many people, since you have been involved, have gone to jail because of their footprint impressions?
Irrelevant.
I'm sorry, could you,
How many cases can you think of, just since you have been on the scene, where footprint evidence has helped to put people in jail for various crimes?
oh, I've made thousands of comparisons since 1973, and I've testified many, many times, but many, many more of those cases were adjudicated in other ways, and I didn't have to offer testimony, so I can't count the number of cases I've influenced, if that's what you're asking.
It is. Now, in most of the cases where you testified, or where there's an adjudication that didn't need your testimony, namely a plea of guilty,
Or stipulation.
or a stipulation that this shoe made that print, and we don't need Mr. Dietrich to tell us that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Bodziak, I'm sorry. I believe your colleague is in a different specialty. You would assume that somewhere along the line, the defendant who got caught because of his own shoe prints was made aware of that fact.
They are, yeah. I mean, they'll sit and watch my testimony, and I've even had one case where they came in the next day without their shoes on. So they certainly are aware of that, yes.
Do you think these fellows chat together at all once they get in the hoosgow?
Calls for speculation.
I'm sure they do.
And most of them are acutely aware of what mistakes they made that caused them to get convicted. Wouldn't you say that's a fair statement?
Yes.
Now, when you say criminals don't know or talk about certain aspects of their business, that's not based on any association you have with criminals, is it?
To the degree of elaboration that you were speculating on with regard to this case, it is far more sophisticated than I would ever envision any criminal, no matter how long they've been in jail or how much they've talked, of being able to pull off.
Well, of course, the criminals that you know about who left footwear impressions weren't so smart because they got caught, right?
And often they get caught a second time
Sure.
with foot impressions.
Sure. Professional assassins frequently do not get caught. True?
Calls for speculation.
Sustained. Sustained.
In any event, have you ever heard of bank robbers that wear covers, a mask, funny mask or something?
All the time, yes.
And that's so that no one can testify I saw that face, right?
Or that the bank camera will not pick up their face.
Have you heard of others who deliberately make themselves up with some degree of expertise to look like someone they are not?
Less rare, but I've heard of it,
A
yes.
higher level of profession, would you say?
Or a different approach, yes.
Well, that would cause a victim witness to look right at the perpetrator and say, that's not the man. Or
I guess you could make that argument, yes.
that would be the purpose of it, wouldn't you think?
It certainly would be.
Right. Now, haven't you investigated crimes, Mr. Bodziak, where it was apparent that the perpetrators were trying to mislead detectives?
I've had a couple cases where they have tried to plant evidence or create evidence to divert the attention from themselves, but that became known in the normal processing of the crime scene. There were things that didn't make sense, and it was ultimately other evidence caused them to admit that they did these things, and they confessed, but they weren't very sophisticated.
Okay. And then there are any number of unsolved crimes where we don't know whether that happened or not. Right?
That's possible, yes.
Without a solution, you don't know whether the planted evidence has misled the officers or has
That's
not.
right, sure.
Well, to bring to a conclusion our investigation of the possibilities that could have led to this evidence that you have compiled for us, my understanding is your best explanation of the excess number of footprints that appears to be there is that one perpetrator wearing one pair of Bruno Magli shoes left the scene, went back, got some more blood, and left the scene a second time.
Well, it's vague as to leaving the scene.
Well, when I say the scene, Mr. Bodziak, I mean the immediate vicinity of the killing where the bodies were found. I do not mean the general surround.
Yes, there would have to be one person with the Bruno Magli-sized shoes that did exactly what you described, left a set of impressions. The blood would have been worn off their shoes, so you wouldn't see a turnaround or a footprints coming back, and then they would have new blood on the shoes for possible reasons, either a second victim or just walking back through the blood of the two victims, and then leaving the scene again.
All right. You are making the assumption in that scenario that before the perpetrator turns and goes back to where the bodies are found, that all the blood is gone from the soles at least so much as is capable of leaving an impression.
The physical evidence at the scene, which doesn't lie, is making that assumption, sir.
Show me a single print going the other way.
That's my point. There is none, and yet there are two sets of tracks of the same size and design shoe. And in my opinion, because of the scarcity and in some cases, stores carried one pair of size 12s and didn't get another till a year later. The scarcity of that design rules out any possibility that there were two people simultaneously with the same pairs of shoes on, Bruno Magli size 12. So that person would have had to have turned around, and obviously the blood was no longer on their feet. They didn't track backwards, and they re-bloodied the shoes and left again.
Okay? And is that the best you're able to make out of the evidence that's before us, despite the fact that there is not one single overlapping step?
I wouldn't, that's a big area. I wouldn't expect an when you say overlapping, you're talking about one step touching another.
One part of an impression overlapping
Overlapping another.
pre-existing impression from trip number one in your scenario.
Yeah, that is a large area. That wouldn't be unusual at all for those two sets of tracks of one person not overlapping.
All right. What is inconsistent about that set of tracks with someone taking very small steps? About a foot at a time.
Well, if you look at those impressions and you try to reenact that as one set of impressions, stepping left and then right and covering every one of those, you would, I don't know how to describe it, but you would look like, unlike anybody that normally walks or runs, you would be dancing around.
Well,
So,
supposing I step right over here into some blood,
yes.
right? And I walk this way. That what?
No,
What's wrong with that?
because in that case, you're giving a consistent pattern of left, right, even though they're close together.
So you conclude that not only because they're close together, but because of the irregularity of the stepping pattern.
I'm looking at impressions that are where you have two lefts and two rights. You can say if this left goes with this right, which is a couple feet later, and goes with this left, which goes a couple feet later, so on, then you're left these other ones. And even though you can't say for certain, matching every footprint in sequence to others, I can see enough in those impressions that tells me there were two separate travelings of one person from that scene westward.
Okay. Can you identify any of the identified footprints and tell me which trip made them in your scenario?
I wasn't asked to do that. If given the proper time, I could go back and possibly show corresponding features of one with another. That gets into an area of, as we mentioned, or as I mentioned at the beginning of answering these questions, I don't purport to be able to reconstruct exactly what happened, but physical evidence can rule out certain possibilities, and my knowledge of these shoes and of what people do at crime scenes with shoes enables me to say certain things, and that's been our discussion. But to go back and say with certainty in every case, this impression preceded this impression and so forth, if asked to do that, I might be able to reconstruct some of that, but probably not all of it.
Okay. And in any event, would be unable to say whether a given footprint was from trip 1 or trip 2.
That's correct. No, I wouldn't be able to tell trip 1 from trip 2.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the shoes. You got what one might call a fair degree of cooperation from the company that made them, did you not?
Quite a bit of cooperation, yes,
Mr.
sir.
Broderick?
Pardon?
Mr.
Mr. Bruderich and Mr. Lumi in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and the Silga and 4C factories were extremely cooperative, yes.
Now, as you trace the manufacture and distribution of these shoes, insofar as the United States is concerned, only this sole was on Bruno Magli's, correct?
No,
The two types.
There was the Lorenzo and the Lyon, Lyon, which both had the same soles, and the only difference being the higher heel counter, or heel versus the cutaway one.
As you showed us this morning,
Yes,
every pair of Lorenzo and Lyon Bruno Magli's had that same sole, correct?
that's correct.
From what you were informed
In the
by company.
distribution in 1991 and 92 in this country.
Were they made in 91 and 92 or distributed in those years?
The distribution was in those years.
Okay, and only those 2 years, right?
They're selling them again, I believe, as of this February or March. Not exactly like this, but I believe it is also called the Lorenzo, and I think it's more in a pebble grain. I haven't seen it, but I think it's a pebble grain type shoe with the same Silga sole.
It is the same sole.
Yeah, it's from the same molds. I don't know if it's the same color, but it's the same from the same mold.
But to the best of your knowledge, from 1992 until the date of the crime, June 12, 1994, none were made or distributed, right?
Not in this country.
Okay. There was a European version called Lord, was it?
Lord, L-O-R-D, yes.
And that's what you learned by conferring with your colleagues in Tokyo, correct?
Well, and I confirmed that at the Silga factory, and in fact, they provided me with their distribution of the soles to other companies in Europe who then sold the shoe in Europe, primarily Italy. And I contacted them to determine if any Lord shoes were sold in the United States. And as thorough as I could be, since a couple factories did go out of business and there was no one to contact, as thorough as I could be, no one had any records of selling any Lord shoes in the United States.
All right, so you're pretty well satisfied that wherever those shoes may now be, they are Bruno Magli's.
Well, the likelihood is there. I
That's
certainly
right.
can't rule out the possibility that someone went to Europe and Italy and bought a pair of ones with Lord on it and came back to the United States, but there
If-
wouldn't be a great number of those.
If they were purchased in the United States by
If-
whomever, they would be Bruno Magli's, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, by the way, you told us this morning when you showed us a certain table where you can give a range of heights for shoe sizes, that's kind of an approximate situation.
Oh, certainly. The purpose of that, of the chart that I prepared, was simply to show that the taller you get, the bigger your foot is, therefore the bigger the shoe is. It's simply a correlation.
Generally speaking.
Yes,
There are prominent exceptions all the time, are there not?
absolutely.
Mr. Douglas, would you stand up, please? Can you estimate his height and weight and tell me what size you think his shoe ought to be?
I can't estimate his height from up here, no.
Okay, well, would you assume that he's about 5'10", 170 pounds?
How tall are you?
5'9".
Well, he looks like he's probably about at least 5'10", maybe 5'11".
Well, that's just a hick.
You've got raised heels on, so I don't know if you, if you're,
I hadn't asked you. If you were gonna ask me. Take a look at Mr. Douglas' feet. Tell me what size they are.
they're pretty long and narrow. They're probably, well, can I walk up and look at them closer?
Sure.
Yeah.
You can meet halfway.
They're pretty long. They're probably 12 or 13.
Okay. That's a little off the chart, isn't it?
Well, I said that was based on 399 males, and it was just to show correlation, and I readily admit that there's exceptions, sure.
Okay. And you're working with a single size when you give that range, are you not? In other words, you said a 12 on this chart is so many inches to so many inches.
The purpose of the chart was just to show that a person, the general range of height of a person with a size 12.
As I understand it, you never did get a response to your request, a factual response, with details to inventory Mr. Simpson's shoe arena.
Act, ask, answer.
Overruled.
I never received any additional shoes, no.
Would it surprise you that in his shoe closet there are sizes as small as 10 and a half and as large as 13, all of which he wears?
Not at all. In fact, in my book, I cite that very example where my shoes ranged from 8 to 10, and I normally wear a 9.
Okay. So the fact that these Bruno Maglis happen to be a 12 might fit different people of different sizes because manufacturers are not precise in their sizing. Isn't that a fair statement?
What I was saying is that we could not eliminate Mr. Simpson. He is a candidate based on these shoes as the wearer of a size 12 Bruno Magli shoe, and we're saying nothing more.
Okay.
For the
Not,
record, when he
excuse
said
me.
these shoes, he gestured towards the Reeboks.
Yes.
Yes. None of your impressions gave any indication as to weight, as might impressions in the
There's
soil.
no valid way to do that, sir.
Okay. So that all that you say, when you say someone is a candidate, is they could have worn those shoes that night,
That's correct.
even if they were much too big.
Well, I'm saying that I believe they are the same, as when I held them up together, the same
Size
size
12.
and interior as well as exterior, and that if Mr. Simpson wore these shoes, then they would be shoes he would possibly wear, a size 12 Bruno Magli.
Well, how many people, statistically, could fit into those shoes?
Well, there it could fit, and you brought up the point earlier, a person with a size 9 could wear them. They certainly wouldn't fit good. They'd be stumbling all over the place, but could they put them on? Yes. So you're asking a question which I can't give a definitive answer to. Obviously, even a size 12, over 9% of the population is a size 12, so a lot of people.
How many 11s and 13s?
I don't know the exact percentages for those.
Many more people, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And are you saying that a person with a size 8 or 9 foot who tied those shoes on and laced them up would be necessarily stumbling all over himself?
Yeah, because I've tried that.
With these shoes?
Yeah.
And you fell on your face?
I didn't fall on my face, but I was trying to commit a crime. I'd never feel comfortable doing that. I wouldn't be running down a sidewalk or even trying to get somewhere in a hurry with that. Again, I know of one possible case in over 20 years where this happened, and a person wore his brother's shoes, and I don't think it was to throw anybody off. I think he didn't have any shoes. So and it became quite evident what happened, because the brother was on a naval, I think, ship out in the Pacific, and they knew it couldn't be him. So it's just a rare occasion. You can say hypothetically, could it happen, but it doesn't happen as a matter of regular practice.
So your experience is that criminals just aren't smart enough to wear oversized shoes to mislead the police. Is that right?
My experience is that shoes are a personal item of clothing, and people generally wear shoes that are theirs, except for socioeconomic reasons or hand-me-downs of brothers and things of that nature. An adult who is affluent enough to purchase their own shoes generally regards their shoes as their own, and those are the shoes they wear. I can't rule out the hypotheticals that you're postulating, because common sense dictates there's no basis for ruling that out. As a matter of practice, in my experience, this just doesn't happen except in rare, rare occasions.
In the 40% of cases where no shoes were recovered for matching purposes, as is the case here, then you have no information as to whether the perpetrator was wearing his correct size or a larger one, correct?
Only based on my experience of the other 60%,
Right.
which is what I've just said.
But the 60%, you said, were people who wore their own shoes to the crime.
Which is pretty representative over a 20-year period of time. It's, if you were to ask people in general whether they typically loan out their shoes, men's athletic shoes, men's casual shoes, they generally don't, unless there's mitigating circumstances.
I'm not talking about loaning anything. I'm saying that in the 40% you didn't recover, for all you know, someone deliberately wore the wrong size.
I can't rule the possibility out. I'm just saying it is not something I normally encounter.
You know that killers who premeditate often disguise themselves, do you not, one way or another?
I'm sorry, who meditate?
Premeditated killers,
Premeditated?
people planning a murder, will
Yes.
often try to disguise themselves, will wear gloves.
People are much more aware of fingerprints than they are of footprints, and they're much more aware of personal identification of a face, and they wear masks. They are far, far less cognizant of hiding their feet, and the hands and face don't normally have personalized articles of clothing that they wear on them. The shoes are personalized articles of clothing. People like to wear their own shoes.
And so far as you know, despite the fact that long before you got on the scene, criminals were being identified by their footprints, you think it's not a subject of their concern. Is that right?
I'm surprised it's not. I'm surprised it's not, but it isn't.
All right. Now let's get to the Bruno Magli shoes. These shoes were made in part by a company called UMA in Italy.
UMA,
UMA, or whatever.
Bruno Magli makes them in Italy. I mean, there's I don't know the exact correct terminology for who owns what, but Bruno Magli in the United States purchased them through a Bruno Magli representative in Italy. I don't know exactly where the UMA initials come in, if that's a separate company and he owns them both, or if it's related to the Bruno Magli.
Huh. But two different companies make two different parts of the shoe, which are joined, and a finished product is produced.
That's correct.
And you attempted, through the executives in the company, to learn everything you could about these two styles of shoes. How many were made, when they were made, where they were shipped, et cetera, correct?
That's correct.
And particularly once you learned that 46 would fit the blood pattern, which I assume was after you went to the factory and obtained all your exemplar soles.
Actually, the soles were shipped to me prior to that, and the trip was to confirm that and learn more about how the American size 12 last was used, and to assure that they didn't use other size last or put other sizes on it. That was the purpose of the trip.
And you satisfied yourself that they did not.
Yes,
And you learned that they did not ship Bruno Magli shoes of this type to any other country. Is that correct?
Oh, no, they could have sold Bruno Magli shoes to other countries. I just couldn't find a tracing of it. In
But
other
the-
words,
All right. The ones that came to America came through Mr. Guterich in New Jersey.
yes.
That was the sole distribution point for the U.S.
His distribution, as I understand it, covers North America, South America, the Caribbean, and the United States. And I believe these were the 40 stores he distributed it to them. Whether Bruno Magli sold that sole in Europe through one of those other Italian factories, what names might have been on those shoes produced in Italy, I didn't pursue that. I was only inquiring as to those people as to whether or not any of their shoes, regardless of whether they were Bruno Magli or Lord or whatever, were shipped otherwise to the United States, other than the ones that Peter Gruderich sold.
Okay. Did he, if you know, drop ship to other countries, or did he physically get the shoes and reship them?
All I know is that he told me he was the owner of that design, that they were only on Bruno Magli's, and that all of the shoes that were sold in the United States were distributed by him. As to how he did the distribution, drop ship or whatever, I didn't determine that.
All right. During the years 91 and 92, do you know how many pair of Bruno Magli shoes, period, were imported through Mr. Gruderich into the United States, forgetting Canada and South America?
Of any design?
No,
Of
these
this
two.
design?
These two.
I only know for size 12, there were a total of 299 size 12s only that were shipped in, that were distributed throughout the United States.
Were any returned, if you know?
Well, obviously, these two, one of these is a 12, so we're down to 298. And I would imagine that there were some which, I know there were some which were returned and like sold as reduced prices through stores like Sims. And whether there were any left over, I asked him about that, and I believe he told me about 3% is a typical average, but he didn't know the exact number in this case.
Okay. What did these shoes run at retail before they were devalued in the secondary stores?
The price tag that's still in one of these shoes says $160.
Okay. That's fairly expensive for a pair of shoes, wouldn't you say?
Yes, sir.
How many different stores actually received a shipment of a size 12 shoe according to the records of Mr. Guterich?
How many stores? There were a total of 40 stores in the United States, including one in Puerto Rico.
And how many did each one receive, if you know?
Well, I'd have to, there's a large list I have that breaks that down by date that goes through, but in most cases, the shipments were one pair at a time to these stores, and then maybe 6 months later, as they replenished their stock, they would order another size 12, and this happened 3 or 4 shipments over a 2-year period to each store. So most stores didn't carry more than one size 12 at one time, although a few stores did.
Okay. Would you tell the court and jury where these stores are located in the United States?
Yeah, I'd have to refer to my
If you
notes.
would, yeah.
Okay, there's 40 of them. Would you like me to just give the cities or the names of the stores, or?
Just give me the cities for the moment.
Okay, of course, some of these, I'll say New York more than one time, so
Sure.
let me just read down the list. Huntington, New York, New York, New York, West Orange, New Jersey, Highland Village, I'm sorry, Jackson, Mississippi, Chicago, Illinois, Dearborn, Michigan, Troy, Michigan, Chevy Chase, Maryland, Hackensack, New Jersey, Yonkers, New York, Charleston, West Virginia, Newton Center, Massachusetts, Jacksonville, Florida, Madison, Wisconsin, Phoenix, Arizona, Costa Mesa, California, San Francisco, California, Norwalk, Connecticut, El Paso, Texas, Decatur, Illinois, North Miami Beach, Florida, Bellevue, Washington, Orlando, Florida, Denver, Colorado, Secaucus, New Jersey, a second store in Secaucus, New Jersey, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, New York, New York, Dallas, Texas, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, again, New York, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Frontenac, Missouri, Westfield, New Jersey, again, New York, New York, Secaucus, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Burlington, Massachusetts, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Guernsey, Illinois.
That's all.
Yes.
So in California, there was one in Costa Mesa, one in San Francisco. I thought I heard one other.
2 in California.
2 in California. Many in New York. Fair statement.
That's correct.
These big chains mostly, or the small individualized
Oh,
stores?
some, Saks, Bloomingdale's were some of the bigger stores in New York. And Saks is all over the country.
Right. I think you told us on direct examination that an effort was made to find out whether there was any record of any sale to Mr. Simpson.
An effort was made by our FBI office in Los Angeles. It was directed by the FBI office and in conjunction with the LAPD homicide unit.
Okay. And is it your understanding that each of the stores was visited and the records checked?
It's my understanding that was done, and I don't have firsthand knowledge of exactly how that was handled and what the results were. I just presume that if we had located something, I would have known about that.
So far as you know, it's all negative, right?
At this point, yes, sir.
Now, was anything other than records checked in order to find out if Mr. Simpson was a fan of Bruno Malley's shoes?
I know there were efforts made to that. I don't have personal knowledge of that, so I may be erroneous if I were to speculate on what that might be.
Okay. Well, as against the ordinary purchase by Joe Average, there's a little edge when trying to find out whether Mr. Simpson bought something, is there not?
I wasn't actively participating in that effort. I just provided the information, so I don't know if there was or wasn't.
You don't know if somebody went to the salespeople who would have been working when these shoes were in stock and said, do you remember the juice?
It's my understanding that when they covered this lead, that they were purposely not mentioning that there was no mention made of Mr. Simpson, or that they were simply trying to reconstruct the records to find all of the shoes.
Wouldn't it have been helpful to find a witness who said, I'll never forget the day I showed O.J. Simpson a pair of Bruno Malley?
Sustained.
I didn't get the ruling on it.
Sustained.
Okay, fine. All right, the long and the short of it is that no one has located any store where it is claimed that Mr. Simpson bought such shoes. True? Your understanding?
Based on their records that apparently aren't very good that many years later, that's correct.
Were there any marks that could have come from shoes at the scene of the crime, and once again I'm referring to the rather specific area around the bodies, that could have represented the footprints of other soles, not the one that we've been dealing with?
None that I'm aware of that were in blood, and actually none of any other type that I'm aware of, that I was given photographs of.
Okay. Were there any partial prints that might have come from a different sole?
None which I saw, other than, back to the ones at the end of the walkway that were indistinct. I couldn't theoretically rule that out, but I don't believe that was the case.
Okay. And the white envelope that you inspected earlier, the glasses envelope,
Yes.
do you or do you not say that that partial print is from the Silga sole?
Well, there's some features in common between it. It's so partial, I can't link it to that specific, a specific size, but it does match the parallel border and the design element of that sole.
You can't rule it in or rule it out, right?
Well, it looks like that sole. If it was a different design, it would have to be one just like the Silga sole with regard to that small part.
Well, are you making an identification or not?
I'm saying that it's consistent with another shoe that has made impressions all over the sidewalk, and in blood, and it's also in that envelope, and in as much as the parallel border and that design element match, I would say that that same shoe also made the impression on the envelope. I would see nothing there to draw attention to a different design of shoe.
All right. Now, there was another piece of white paper, which I understand is missing. Did you examine another piece of white paper with some kind of impression on it at some point?
Assumes facts not known, sir.
Oh, well,
From the Bundy scene?
Yeah.
No, there were two pieces of paper, I think from the Bronco or Rockingham, but not from the Bundy scene.
Did you examine any impression evidence that came from Rockingham?
There was a piece of paper that, it's hard for me to tell where, it's my understanding it was Rockingham. I saw photographs of a vehicle, and there was a piece of paper next to it. I don't know where that photograph, from my personal knowledge, was taken, but it possibly was Rockingham. And I examined that piece of paper, and then there was a piece of paper that was in the Bronco of the defendant. And of course, that Bronco was at times at Rockingham, so I don't know if you would want to call that from Rockingham or from wherever they found it at the time.
Oh, the answer
So
is
I did, the answer is
the answer
yes,
is
I guess.
responsive, but I had more in mind the walkway, the driveway, the
Oh, no,
interior of the
no.
house, and so forth.
None was submitted to me.
Mr. Bodziak, you're going to have to allow Mr. Bailey to finish
sorry.
asking the question.
Assume that someone who had worn the extrinsic blood off the lower part of the sole, that is the part that contacts the concrete, as you said, would eventually happen,
Yes.
then walks on a carpeting. Isn't there still some blood likely to be damp enough to transfer that the carpeting would catch by getting up inside the pattern? So that is to say, whereas a flat concrete surface just makes this contact. As you pointed out before, you could get a reverse contact if a bunch of hairs went up in between the pattern.
That's correct.
True. Did you ever see any evidence from the Simpson home in that respect?
No, I did not.
Do you know if any was ever looked for?
I couldn't answer that question. I don't have personal knowledge of what people were doing at the crime scene.
Were you ever asked to view any photographs of impressions lifted from his driveway, the street near his home, his walkway, etc.?
To my knowledge, none were found.
Is it fair to say that most of the impressions that you examined are on that board today, either identifiable or not identifiable?
That's correct.
Excuse me a minute, Your Honor. With respect to your examination of the photographs of the Bronco, which you enhanced, in two ways, I believe, but the second time you photographed in daylight and showed it.
The carpeting you're referring to.
My understanding is there is insufficient detail present to call it one way or the other as to those marks, whether they're a footprint or not, in the Bronco.
I couldn't associate them with the Solga sole, yes.
Now, Mr. Bodziak, you made a statement in response to a question of Mr. Goldberg's that one kind of criminal who is attached to his shoes is likely to take them home, and sometimes they're recovered, and sometimes they help capture him.
I don't think that was the summary of what I said.
Well, you had a 60-40 breakdown, and the 40 were the more likely to destroy their shoes. That's what captured my interest.
I think that mistakes the testimony.
But
Well, Mr. Bodziak, I think, can handle this question.
That was based on the submissions to our laboratory. What I said previously about the bloody impressions was of the shoes, of the cases involving shoes where the suspect purposely got rid of the clothing and bloody shoes, were in fact, in overwhelmingly most cases, those where they saw the blood on their shoes, they saw the blood on their clothing, and anybody would know that that was incriminating, and they would therefore very quickly get rid of the clothing. Even then, in some cases, we have people go back, throw the clothes in the wash, wash their shoes, and we've actually recovered shoes from people that were still wet. But in most cases with bloody clothing, it's very obvious that they have to get rid of the clothes and the shoes because it's incriminating evidence.
Okay. And in order to be able to dispose of the accoutrements of murder, that is bloody shoes, clothes, and maybe a weapon, there must be an opportunity, must there not?
That would be common sense, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Goldberg, any redirect?
Yes, I do. Mr. Bodziak, you were asking questions about crime scene processing type issues. Can you just briefly indicate for us what additional experience you have in the area of crime scene processing exclusively as it relates to collection of shoe print evidence?
Well, the function of the laboratory that I work in, the FBI lab, is not primarily to respond to crime scenes, but I have on occasion responded to crime scenes. In addition, perhaps the biggest summary of crime scene efforts that I see is in the casework that's submitted to me, namely the photographs, the casts, lifts, and other evidence which relates to shoes. And then talking to the investigators, seeing general photographs of the scene, reading about the circumstances of the scene. So to that effort, I have a great deal of experience in understanding what is normally retrieved and normally found at crime scenes, and what efforts are normally successful and what efforts are not.
Have you also taught people how to do crime scene investigation in the area of shoe print analysis?
That's one of the most common requests which I get, and I've been doing it steadily since 1982.
And have you tested various techniques for searching for shoe prints and also recovering shoe prints?
Yes, any materials or methods which are new, we immediately obtain to see if they're better than what might have been existing before and to see if they work.
Okay. Now, breaking down the Bundy Drive location into some discrete components, I want to ask you some questions about searching and retrieving shoe prints. Directing your attention to what we've referred to in this case as being the caged-off area, the area north of where Q67 and Q68 was located. If you arrived at the crime scene at night, what kind of technique would be used in order to search for shoe prints in the soil in this area?
The technique would be to use what we call an oblique light source, and the word oblique simply refers to the light being held low to the ground and grazing the ground, and that helps in determining the depressed areas versus the non-depressed areas, and it basically visualizes the shoe prints better.
And can you give us an example of what an oblique light source would be?
An oblique light source could be anything from a sophisticated high-intensity light source that generates a lot of light, and you'd have to plug in somewhere, and on the other end you would probably see just natural sunlight in the morning grazing the ground, or a flashlight grazing the ground, and any of these would be suitable for finding these impressions. Obviously, the ones with more light intensity would show them up better, but you could also see them with the other methods.
So would a high-intensity flashlight then qualify?
If used properly, yes.
And by properly, you mean by shining it at an oblique angle across the area?
Yes, by grazing the surface and looking for impressions in that area. Yep.
So if detectives did a search of this area with the flashlight, would that qualify as a competent search for shoe impressions in that area?
If they were using the flashlight specifically in that manner and were carefully looking, that light would be adequate for finding them, yes.
Okay, now let's talk about shoe prints, impressions on the walkway at a nighttime search. What would be done for locating shoe impressions on a nighttime search on the walkway?
Just a portable light source to light up the area.
Would a flashlight qualify as an oblique type light?
Well, you
under
wouldn't
those
use it,
circumstances?
I'm sorry. You wouldn't use an oblique light source on the concrete. You would just want to illuminate it. The concrete is not an area where you're likely to find dust impressions because it has so much residual dust to begin with. So, and because it's very rough and porous and uneven. So to look at that surface with a light surface is unlikely to produce anything. But just looking for opaque impressions such as the blood impressions, just the high intensity light, you could use a flashlight, but the brighter the light, the easier it would be.
Okay, now switching to a daytime search, what kind of search would you do in the area of what we've called the caged off area in the soil during the day?
In the daytime, the amount of light around you is so much more intense than these portable light sources that basically at that point you're just looking for any depressions in the soil with just your naked eye and the existing light.
And if that was done, would that be a competent search of that area during the day?
Actually, the light source, oblique light source at night would make it easier to see those depressions than trying to look at them on a bright sunny day.
And if you did both, would that be a competent search of that area?
Yes.
Now, with respect to a daytime search of the area that we've been referring to as the walk, which is made of the tiles and concrete, what would constitute a competent search of this area for bloody shoe prints and also possible latent shoe prints during the day?
Well, the bloody shoe prints, of course, would, for just searching for them or for recovering them?
Well, let's start with searching for them.
Okay, searching for them, again, just a light source that would enable you to adequately see the sidewalk area. Daylight would be better. If you were looking at night, any light source that was adequate enough to illuminate the sidewalk so you could see the sidewalk would be adequate. The brighter the light, obviously, it would make it easier.
What about using, we've heard testimony about oblique light and alternate light and all these fancy things. What about using those on the surface that we're referring to as the walkway, the concrete, and the tile for the purpose of trying to look for latent shoe prints? Shouldn't that have been done?
Well, I have never seen a latent shoe print except in one occasion, which was a rarity in Florida. I haven't seen a latent shoe print on a concrete surface in all of the other cases I've worked because concrete is inherently dusty and dirty and rough and porous, and for a flat surface, in order to see those minute residue impressions, you have to literally skim the surface, and you can't do that with an oblique light source on concrete, a concrete walkway such as this, because magnified, it's going like this, and the light would just cast a lot of shadows and irregularities. Secondly, a residue impression would not occur on this sidewalk because residue meaning dust or dirt, because as I had mentioned before, whether you're walking across the carpeting here or concrete, you're picking up the same and redepositing the same residue, and you wouldn't see any differentiation. I only had one case where I saw someone walk across wet sand in Florida, and then the sand was deposited on the concrete and gave adequate differentiation to leave impressions. Other than that, I've never seen one on concrete.
Okay, well, what about using some other technique like an electrostatic dust print lifter in order to look for latent prints that might have existed on the walkway area during a daytime search?
It wouldn't be applicable for residue impressions because you're picking up the same residue and putting it down. The only time the electrostatic lifting device is of use is when you step on something relatively clean. So if there was an object that was clean laying across the walkway, and you were picking the residue up from the normal concrete and then stepped on that clean object, then you could make a lift of that object and you may recover a footwear impression, but you wouldn't recover it from the walkway itself.
So in your view, if a visual search was made for shoe prints at night using a flashlight on the surface that we've referred to as the walkway, and then also a visual daytime search was made for shoe prints on that walkway, would that be a competent way of processing this crime scene as far as shoe prints are concerned?
Well, it would be, let me say that you wouldn't find any other prints on a concrete walkway like that other than something like blood or grease or water, which of course would evaporate very quickly. You're not going to find any other kind of, you're not going to find three-dimensional impressions, you're not going to find dry residue impressions, you're only going to find opaque type of impressions on concrete. So looking at it with a light source, just a white light source, a visual situation, daytime or a light source at night, is what you would need just to visualize those impressions.
Okay, now we've heard a lot of testimony in this case about booties and trampling over latent footprints. What do you feel about wearing, should the officers in this case that searched the crime scene initially and walked through what we referred to as the walkway area that's concrete and tile, should they have worn booties?
Actually, the impressions would have been dry probably within 5 to 10 minutes, with the exception of the large quantities of blood around the victim and perhaps underneath the victim. And so those impressions wouldn't be affected whether the person had booties on or was just wearing their regular shoes. In the areas immediately adjacent to the victims, where there was larger quantities of blood that were perhaps shielded from the air, the tackiness of the blood might last a little longer. And in looking at crime scene material that's sent to me, the only occasion with regard to blood impressions that we ever get secondary impressions from police officers or paramedics are those which result when they come to the scene and maybe turn the body over to see if they, to verify they're deceased or to give them the necessary, attention and uncover those previously shielded areas that might still be tacky. So with regard to the ones down the walkway from A on, it wouldn't matter if they were wearing booties or just their shoes. They would not affect those impressions.
What is your position on wearing booties? And I'm referring strictly to not health issues, but the question of preserving footprints at a crime scene.
Well, I think the purpose in wearing booties might extend into other areas of forensic science where they're perhaps trying to preserve other types of evidence as well. Simply with regard to footwear impressions, the booties, actually, I have seen some booty prints more often around the body, as I previously described, than I have shoe prints. So they seem to have more of an affinity for tracking the pattern of the booty than a person's shoes do in themselves, just tracking their shoe print.
So does that mean that you are recommending or not recommending the wearing of booties when the health issue is not a concern in terms of footprint recovery?
Except for the area, like I mentioned, right around the body, it doesn't make any difference. It's just that it's cloth, and cloth tends to pick up stuff more than leather or rubber, so
Okay.
it doesn't really make that much difference.
Now, sir, with respect to what you understand of the crime scene processing of the shoe prints from your conversations that you presumably, well, let me ask you this first. When you went to the scene with Mr. Fung, did you have some conversations with him relating to the shoe prints in this case?
What aspect of the shoe prints?
Well, where they were, how they were recovered, and so on, how they were photographed and the like.
I had conversations with him and other people prior to coming out here to ascertain whether there were any other photographs of any other footwear impressions that I had not been given. And in coming out here, I reviewed many photographs of the general crime scene to make sure that there wasn't anything overlooked with regard to footwear impression evidence. So I was pretty familiar with that prior to coming out to the Bundy scene.
All right. And based upon that, as well as your reviewing of the evidence in this case that you've previously discussed and your understanding of how the scene was processed, was the scene, insofar as shoe prints are concerned, processed in a competent manner when you're comparing it to what you've grown to understand as the national standard in the forensic community?
With regard just to the photographs or the whole
The
scene?
photographs in the scene.
The photographs were adequate. They are better than most that we receive in the laboratory.
Okay. And what about the rest of the processing?
Well, I would have, as I previously stated, tried a protein stain or some other chemical enhancement on the impressions. In cases of bloody impressions on a light-colored surface, such as this walkway, in most cases, the chemical enhancement gives very little additional enhancement. But I would have tried it as a practice. If we had a pair of shoes to compare with these tracks, then perhaps that fine difference between what we might have achieved with chemical enhancement versus what we have with good photographs might have made a difference. For purposes of determining what size shoe it was and what pattern it was, which you can see already with the photographs, it wouldn't have made any difference.
So in terms of what you're used to getting at the FBI for purposes of analysis in the area of shoe prints, was the quality of the work that was done here in terms of shoe prints pretty high?
Well, I can only judge by what I received, and
Okay.
what I received was good quality for comparison purposes.
Now, you were asked some questions about various hypotheticals in terms of how these two shoe prints, how the shoe prints, the left and right shoe prints and the indistinct ones could have been deposited at the crime scene. Do you recall that series of questions
With regard to
by Mr. Bailey?
by M and N and O?
Yeah.
Yes.
And sir, is there anything that you observed in your analysis, in addition to what you've already told us, in terms of the wear characteristics of the shoes, which would be helpful to us in resolving this scenario that you were given in which two individuals purchased two size 12 Bruno Magli shoes in 1991 or 92 and then saved them for a special occasion where they wanted to dress up in their nice Italian loafers for the purposes of committing a murder? Is there anything that you can tell us about the wear characteristics that would help us resolve that hypothetical?
Only in general terms that none of the impressions showed any great degree of wear. As I've mentioned before, they were either unworn or of very little wear. And so, again, to the hypothetical, which I don't agree with, that two people did this, that would also mean that they didn't wear their shoes very much until they committed this crime, which is not what I agree with.
Okay. May I just have one moment, Your Honor? I just want to look at the rest of my notes. Now, sir, in terms of the hypotheticals that you were given, is there anything that would rule out the possibility that a suspect went down the walkway and then at some point realized that he had left a hat and also a glove behind and came back for the purposes of trying to find them, could not do so or became alarmed and then fled the crime scene?
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Is there anything that would tell you that that did not happen or did happen?
based on the footprints?
Yes.
Well, as I've stated before, I believe the same person left both sets of footprints, which means that they had to have turned back and come back to that scene. So that certainly is one of many possibilities.
Now, you were asked whether there were any footprints that were facing in the other direction, meaning in an easterly direction on this diagram. In the area of the stairs, was there such a footprint?
It was a very light footprint coming down the stairs on the same step as impression number B. That was the enlarged photograph, which I had said did not have a scale or and was taken at a slight angle, and to which I had two overlays taped to, one going in one direction and one in the other. One of those was coming back down the step, and it was just a very fragment of the edge of the shoe, so because it was coming down the step, it's possible that, again, with that weight being emphasized on that foot, there might be a little bit of blood squeezed out that wasn't coming out before, and you could have had that light impression. So that's possible that that was a representation of the return of the person after the first walking down the sidewalk.
Can you show us where that is on the Bundy chart?
Yes. The blue or purple right footwear impression, which is the center impression on the step, which is marked B, is very, very light and coming back down in an easterly direction toward the original crime scene.
Okay. Thank you. And sir, in your experience with the Federal Bureau of Investigation analyzing footprint cases, have you ever heard of a case where two suspects bought two shoes of the same size with the same lack of wear characteristics on them, and then walked at a crime scene in such a way so as to replicate only one person having been at the crime scene?
No, I haven't.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Mr. Bailey?
Nothing further.
All right, Mr. Bodziak, thank you very much, sir. You are excused. People may call their next witness.
You will call Mr. Poser to the stand.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Goldberg, do you want to collect the Reeboks here? All right, ladies and gentlemen, something has come up that I need to take a recess at this time, so we're going to break 15 minutes early today. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves, form any opinions about the case, conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you, or allow anybody to communicate with you. And as far as the jury is concerned, we'll stand in recess till tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. All right, and let me see counsel with the court reporter, please.